Okay, welcome back to part three. And so we were talking about Diane Arbus, and she was kind of a revolutionary photographer in that her work was so informal and it was so personal in a way. Even when it was focused on others, it was a very personal approach to other people. And it was shocking in a way, but it was a start of a trend of artists who were making photography be about things other than the grand and very kind of obsessive formal obsessions and craft obsessions of someone like Ansel Adams or Edward Weston. And to a certain degree, I think you could see Sally Mann as being a photographer who is somewhat of a compromise between those, that she is very much a craftsman and in her own right really makes dense, lush and photography that very much plays with things like depth of field. And so it's very formal in some ways, very craft oriented, but is also, because these are kind of like very self obsessive kind of uh, explorations of her personal life and her family, uh, do pair between, Nan Goldin and Diane Arbus for me pretty well. So Nan Goldin, I think you could very definitely see as a continuation of the approach to photography that Diane Arbus had, but with maybe a little bit more of a of kind of like just an interest in focusing outward to the world. One of the things that's really interesting about her work was that for the longest time her work existed almost entirely just in slideshows. That she would go and she would visit museums, galleries, and universities, and she would do these slideshows where she would play music and she would talk over the photographs that she was showing the images, and that became like kind of like the her media was just showing her photography through slideshow. Um, but she is also certainly an excellent artist in terms of making physical prints as well. So now we're kind of headed into the postmodernists and into the contemporary artists, and I'll try to get to all of them, although we might have to go through them kind of fast. So the first one I wanted to talk about is Cindy Sherman, who um, I think she uses photography primarily as a way to explore self and the mutability of self, kind of the lack of self. So at the start of her career, she was making artwork where there were these scenes, kind of imagined scenes from imagined movies, where she would get to dress up as her pretend idea of an actress and play these parts as if she was in a movie, and then play different parts. I love these grids that she made, where it's her, transitioning from one makeup set to another, from one character to another. And as she moved into other types of work, color work, they got a little bit more dramatic, a little bit more kind of baroque and extreme. And then later works where she's obsessing about kind of recreating famous paintings. Um, but her work has always been really, really interesting. And for all of these works, she is always the model. This is her in every single one of these photographs. Okay, another contemporary photographer I want to talk about is Philip-Lorca, and he kind of takes this idea that um, uh, we see in Cindy Sherman's work of like the ambiguity between something feeling set up versus something feeling like a moment, a snapshot. And he really kind of pushes that, where he's trying to create these almost like these snapshot moments, but then because they're so carefully composed and the craft of them is so dense and so much like the thought about lighting and everything, that they feel similarly like a still in a movie or even like a moment from a painting, as much as they feel like just a random snapshot, and trying to kind of hover in that in between space between those two things. I think some of them feel more kind of like purposely composed than others. For me, my favorite of his work are the ones where you're not quite sure whether this just could be like this sort of piece could be just a random shot that he just found in a moment, versus a very carefully set up shot where he brought in lights and he had a crew and everything, and he shot it like he was shooting a movie. Uh, Veronica Dykstra is a really interesting artist, and She does a lot of these kind of process sort of pieces where she'll just set up a situation and then take photographs in that situation. So, such as going to bullfights in Spain and then photographing the bullfighters in the moment right before the fight and then immediately after the fight, or this kind of series where she kind of followed the career of young soldiers and she would photograph them every couple of months through their service and sort of just kind of document some of the changes that she saw in them. Hiroshi Sugimoto is one of my favorite photographers of all time, and what I love about him is that he's so clever and so thinks like a um, like a postmodern artist. You know, just kind of playing with our expectations about what is art and what is not, what is real and what is not. Like these photographs of these kind of dioramas from natural history museums, but at the same time, he is as much an obsessive craftsman as Ansel Adams ever was. You know, he's just really, really interested in the science and the art and the craft of the media photography. So I love how he's both postmodern and modernist simultaneously. And I love this series of photographs. He does this series of photographs where in every location he visits around the world, he will always find some view where he can look at the open sea and he'll take a photograph in this format of exactly with a horizon line exactly halfway through the middle. But it's always different because the atmosphere and the conditions of the water are always slightly different. So it's like all these photographs that are exactly the same, and yet each one is significantly and importantly different. And they are amazing photographs. So the last contemporary photographer I'm going to talk about today, I think this is the last, is Andreas Gursky, who has the notable honor of being the photographer who has sold a contemporary photographer who has sold his photographs for the highest amount. And he is kind of, I think the thing that he's most interested in his photography is the idea that if photography is a true representation of us seeing things, right? Because a lot of people believe in photography as being very truthful. But then if he designs it in such a way that it forces us to see things in a way that we can't see them in real life, and I'll explain what I mean by that, that it kind of plays on that idea of the truthfulness of photography. What I mean by that is that he designs these to be perfectly sharp in focus on everything. He does it by photographing these in parts so that he can make sure that every part is crisply photographed. And what that does is he creates these huge photographs, huge prints of huge spaces where everything is sharp and crisp together. And that actually makes an image that feels very strange and alien, unnatural, because that's not the way we see things. When we actually look in the world, we photograph or we focus on one thing or another. And when we focus on one thing, everything else is less in focus. But in his photographs, we don't get that relief. Everything is crisply there simultaneously. This particular photograph is from a neutrino collector in Japan, and it is an amazing image to see in person because it's really quite large, and it's and like I said, everything is just absolutely crisply clear, and it's way more than you could ever see if you were actually there. It's so overwhelming. All right, that's my 1 minute mark, and I think this is my last image. So I just want to explain a little bit about how this neutrino collector works. This is underground, and what it's doing is, these are like, these balls here are plated with gold, and then this is a pool of water that these boats are on. This is huge space. And this collector, it does not collect the neutrinos that are coming from space, because those are going way too fast for the collector to even receive them. It's collecting the neutrinos that have gone all the way through the Earth, through the core of the Earth, and are coming out the other side. And this is designed to pick up and notice those. All right, okay, that's the end. I'll see you next at the next part of Unit 8, which I believe is the focus on focus.